You know that feeling, right? Like when you log off at the end of the day and you are just completely exhausted.
Oh, absolutely drained.
Yeah, drained. But then you look back at your screen and you realize you haven't actually accomplished anything meaningful.
Right.
I really want you to picture that feeling because you've spent, 8 hours feverishly answering this relentless barrage of emails. You've sat through like 3 completely misaligned team meetings where everyone is just talking over each other.
And no one actually decides anything.
Exactly. And then you spend your whole afternoon trying to decipher what exactly your siloed department is even supposed to be focusing on this quarter.
It's just a mess.
It is. And everyone around you in the office or, on the Zoom grid, they're working incredibly hard. Like people are sweating, but somehow collectively, the company is achieving very little.
Yeah. It's so common.
And looming over all of this daily friction is the absolute dreaded annual performance review, where you just know you're going to be judged on metrics you haven't even looked at since like last January.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
It's a universal modern workplace pain point, and frankly, it is burning people out at record speeds.
It truly is the ultimate paradox of the modern knowledge economy. I mean, we have more communication tools at our disposal than any generation in human history.
Oh, for sure. Slack, Zoom, Teams, everything.
Right. Instant messaging, collaborative documents, yet we have never been more profoundly misaligned. And I think the core issue is that we consistently confuse activity with output.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, just because you're sprinting on a treadmill doesn't mean you are actually running in the right direction. It just means you're getting tired.
Wow, I love that treadmill analogy because it hits so close to home for anyone working in a modern organization today. But there is an antidote to all this chaos. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr.
Such a crucial book.
It really is. We are going to explore this goal-setting framework called OKRs, which stands for Objectives and Key Results.
And we need to be very clear right from the jump here. We are not just talking about some abstract, flavor of the month management theory.
Not just another buzzword.
Exactly.
Right.
We are looking at a very specific, battle-tested system that has fundamentally rewired the global economy over the last few decades.
That's right. The mission of this deep dive is to completely deconstruct how iconic organizations, and we're talking about heavyweights here, from Intel and Google to the Gates Foundation and even U2's frontman Bono.
Yeah, Bono, which is always wild to think about.
I know. But we're looking at how they use OKRs, along with their incredibly vital human counterpart, which is CFRs.
Right, which stands for conversations, feedback, and recognition.
Exactly. We're going to break down exactly how they use these tools in tandem to achieve absolute operating excellence. Okay, let's unpack this, because the promise that John Doerr makes in this book is massive.
It is massive. But what makes it so compelling is that it's built on a very simple, very ruthless foundational belief that Doerr repeats like a mantra throughout the book. And that is, ideas are easy. Execution is everything.
Execution is everything.
Right? Like, you can sit in a boardroom and have the most brilliant world-changing concept in the world, but if you cannot align your team, focus your resources, and measure your progress in real time, that idea is entirely worthless.
It's just a dream at that point.
Exactly. Execution is the only thing that separates the dreamers from the titans of industry.
Okay, so before we get into the nuts and bolts of how this system actually works on a daily basis, I think we have to understand where it came from. Because this didn't just appear out of thin air in some, Silicon Valley garage.
No, not at all.
It has a very specific lineage. We have to go back to Peter Drucker, the legendary management thinker, because he created something in the mid-20th century called MBOs, or management by objectives.
Right. And Drucker was genuinely revolutionary for his time. Because back then, he was pushing back against that deeply authoritarian Henry Ford style of management.
Where workers are just cogs in a machine.
Literally treated like cogs on a manufacturing line. Drucker's MBOs suggested something radical for the era, which was that employees should actually have a say in their goals.
Can you imagine that?
I know, right?
Right.
But over the decades, as these corporations grew into massive bureaucracies, MBOs became completely stagnant. Just think about how they were actually implemented. They were usually set annually. They were kept totally private, like locked away in some HR file cabinet.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah. And they became entirely top-down, meaning the boss just dictated them to you, completely ignoring Drucker's original intent. And, most fatally to the entire system, they were tied directly to your compensation and your end-of-year bonuses.
Which, that introduces a massive psychological flaw into the system. Because if my year-end bonus, the money I literally use to pay my mortgage, depends entirely on hitting a specific goal, human nature dictates I am going to make sure that goal is incredibly easy to hit.
Oh, 100%.
Right. I'm going to sandbag it. I'm going to negotiate for a goal I know I can already achieve blindfolded.
Exactly. You were actively incentivized against taking any risks.
Oh.
But then, enter Andy Grove at Intel in the 1970s. Grove was this visionary engineer and executive, and he looks at Drucker's MBOs and completely transforms them into what he originally called IMBOs.
Intel Management by Objectives.
Right, which later became universally known as OKRs. And the contrast between the two systems is like night and day.
It really is a complete inversion of the old corporate model. Walk us through those structural changes. What did Grove actually do?
Well, where MBOs were annual and sluggish, Grove made OKRs quarterly, or sometimes even monthly, forcing this rapid cadence of evaluation. Where MBOs were private, OKRs were radically public and transparent.
Like everyone could see them.
Yes. Everyone in the company could see everyone else's goals. Where MBOs were top-down mandates, Grove insisted that a huge portion of OKRs had to be bottom-up. They had to be generated by the employees themselves based on what they were seeing on the front lines.
That is a huge shift.
It is. And crucially, addressing that exact psychological flaw you just mentioned, Grove largely divorced OKRs from compensation.
Oh, wow.
He wanted his engineers to take massive, audacious risks without the paralyzing fear of losing their livelihood if they, failed to hit the mark.
Right, because Grove's whole philosophy was that output is the only thing that matters, not activity. I think the old Intel slogan was literally Intel delivers. But here is where I struggle a bit with this concept.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you measure output when you aren't building physical cars on an assembly line? Like, how do you measure the output of a software engineer writing code or a marketing manager brainstorming a campaign? It's not a widget you can just count at the end of the shift,
Well, what's fascinating here is that was the absolute brilliance of Andy Grove. He took the strict, quantifiable production principles of physical manufacturing and adapted them to the soft professions, of knowledge work.
The soft professions, right.
He realized that even thought work, even creative work, needs a measurable benchmark. You need to know if you actually crossed the finish line or not. If you are a marketing manager, the output isn't the brainstorming meeting. The output is, say, a 10% increase in customer engagement. You have to quantify the abstract.
Which brings us to this legendary moment in business history, which is just beautifully detailed in the book. It's 1999. John Doerr, who had learned this OKR system directly from Andy Grove during his time at Intel, is now a venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins.
Right.
And he decides to take the biggest financial bet of his career on this tiny little search engine startup with a very weird name, operating out of a cramped space above an ice cream parlor in Palo Alto, Google. He walks into Google's new headquarters to pitch this OKR system to Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and their entire company, which at the time, the entire company was about 30 people, and they literally gathered around a ping pong table to hear him speak.
It is an incredible scene to visualize, especially knowing what Google is today. You have these young, brash Stanford dropouts. They had pitched Doerr earlier that year to secure funding, and they did it with a 17-slide deck.
Just 17 slides.
Yeah, and this is perfectly illustrative of who they were at their core. Out of those 17 slides, only 2 actually had numbers on them.
That's hilarious.
Right. But when Doerr asked Larry Page a very pointed question, he said, "How big do you think Google can be?" Page didn't even flinch. He calmly said, $10 billion.
And Doerr thought he meant a $10 billion market cap, right? Which would have been an astronomical success for a startup at that time anyway.
Exactly. But Page corrected him and said, "No, I don't mean market cap. I mean $10 billion in revenue."
That is insane.
He was predicting a $100 billion market cap before they even had a fully viable, proven business model.
That kind of boundless ambition is incredibly rare, but I guess what Doerr recognized as a seasoned investor was that they completely lacked management experience.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if they were going to reach that mythical $10 billion revenue mark, they needed intense operational discipline. They needed a way to fail fast, learn, and pull the plug on bad ideas quickly before they burn through all their capital. So Doerr stands at that ping pong table and pitches them the OKR framework.
And surprisingly, they embrace it completely.
Right, but I have to ask why. I'm struggling to see how Larry Page, a guy who fundamentally hated rules and bureaucracy, agreed to this. It feels like putting a corporate straitjacket on a creative genius. Wait, did the data actually give them a safety net to be like More reckless?
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
In the book, Doerr describes how OKRs were the perfect impedance match for Google's DNA.
Okay, wait. Impedance match. Let's clarify that for the listener, because that sounds like a very dense engineering term.
It is, yeah. In electrical engineering, an impedance match is about maximizing the power transfer from a source to a load without losing energy. If you think about Google, they had this massive, chaotic source of raw creative energy and ambition.
So much energy.
But without a structure, that energy just dissipates into the ether, right? It gets wasted on pet projects that go nowhere. OKRs acted as the impedance match. It was the exact structural load needed to capture all that wild blue sky thinking and transfer it into actual deliverable products.
Ah, I see.
Google was a data-worshipping, open-source culture. They naturally defaulted to open communication. OKRs provided an elastic, data-driven apparatus that didn't stifle their freewheeling thinking. It empowered it. It gave them the framework to take massive risks, but measure the outcomes with absolute, brutal scientific honesty.
It makes me think about it like this. Drucker's old MBO system was like going in for your dreaded annual medical checkup. You get a lecture from your doctor about your cholesterol once a year. You feel guilty about it, and then you leave the office and completely ignore the advice for another 12 months. But OKRs are like wearing a highly calibrated daily fitness tracker. You are getting real-time, actionable feedback. You know exactly where your heart rate is, exactly how many steps you've taken, and how your sleep affected your performance. You can course correct in real time.
That's a great analogy.
But let me challenge this reliance on data for a second.
Yeah.
Sure, in theory, data levels the playing field. But in the real world, whoever actually defines the metrics holds the power.
True.
If I'm a manager and I want to protect my department's reputation, I just design the OKR so my team always looks good. How did Andy Grove prevent people from essentially rigging the game?
That is the exact trap that destroys traditional goal setting, right? And Grove solved it through radical transparency. Because OKRs are entirely public, peer pressure and cross-department visibility act as an immune system against rigged metrics.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you set an OKR that is clearly a softball, or if you define a metric that benefits you but hurts the engineering team next door, everyone sees it immediately. You can't hide a sandbagged goal when the entire company can review your dashboard.
You just look foolish.
Right. Grove believed that the best way to respect an employee was to give them absolute clarity, but also to demand absolute honesty in return. When the data does the talking in a public forum, it levels the playing field. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO or a summer intern. If your publicly visible data proves a point, you win the argument. That is profoundly humanizing because it actively rewards merit over hierarchy.
That makes a lot of sense. The transparency acts as the ultimate auditor. And to prove that this isn't just theoretical tech jargon discussed in boardrooms, the book features a story that perfectly illustrates how the system operates in the trenches during a literal life-or-death corporate crisis.
Yes, this is a great story.
Let's look at how OKRs saved $1 billion company from an existential threat in just 4 weeks.
You're talking about Intel's Operation Crush.
The ultimate crucible. The year is 1979. Intel had essentially invented the microprocessor. They were the undisputed kings of the hill. But suddenly, their newest chip, the 8086, is getting beaten badly in the marketplace. And not just by a little bit. A massive competitor, Motorola, had released their own chip, the 68000, and it was objectively faster, it was easier for engineers to program, and it was absolutely crushing Intel.
It was a 5-alarm fire for the company. Intel was bleeding market share at a terrifying rate. The entire future of the company was on the line. And the response from leadership, specifically a marketing manager named Jim Lally, was incredibly visceral. His rallying cry to the executive team was blunt. He literally said, "We have to kill Motorola. We have to crush the king bastards."
You don't get much more direct than that.
No, you don't. The existential dread was palpable. So Andy Grove tasks an executive named Bill Davidow with leading what they officially dubbed Operation Crush. And Davidow realizes very quickly that they cannot engineer their way out of this in time.
Right. Building a new chip takes years.
Exactly. They can't just pause the market and build a better chip overnight. So they have to completely shift the narrative of the market itself. Instead of selling to programmers based on how easy the chip is to use, because they would lose that argument to Motorola, they decide to start selling over the programmers' heads directly to the CEOs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they pitched the long-term value, the reliability, and the sheer scale of Intel's entire system and service ecosystem.
Right. They brilliantly moved the battlefield to a terrain where they held the high ground. But here is the monumental operational challenge, right? How do you get an entire global company, sales, marketing, engineering, manufacturing, technical support, to completely pivot their daily operations and their entire strategic mindset in a matter of days.
It's almost impossible.
It is. That is where the OKR framework proved its weight in gold. They set a massive company-wide objective, established the 8086 as the highest performance 16-bit microprocessor family, and they measured it with incredibly aggressive key results. The most famous one was to secure 2,000 design wins.
Let's pause and explain what a design win is, because it's crucial to understanding why this specific metric was so brilliant. A design win isn't just selling a chip today. It means getting a company's engineering team to legally commit to using the Intel chip as the brain for their upcoming product, which might not launch for another 3 years.
Oh, so it locks them in.
Exactly. It is a leading indicator of future market dominance, whereas just counting daily sales is a lagging indicator.
It was a forward-looking metric that guaranteed long-term survival. And the result of this hyper-focused alignment is legendary in Silicon Valley. They didn't just hit the 2,000 design wins, they blew past it, hitting 2,300 design wins.
Incredible.
The 8086 chip recaptured 85% of the global market, and the most critical design win of all. The chip ended up inside the very first IBM PC,
Which changed everything.
which basically standardized the entire personal computer revolution around Intel architecture. And as a reward for this miraculous turnaround, the entire Intel sales force won a trip to Tahiti.
Not a bad bonus.
No, not at all. It's an incredible victory. But wait, I have to challenge the mechanics of this based on what we just discussed a few minutes ago.
Wait, shoot.
We established that Grove's OKRs are supposed to be heavily bottom-up, right? You empower the frontline employees to set their own goals to foster innovation. But Operation Crush sounds like a massive top-down corporate mandate, like, we're going to war, here are your exact orders. Why didn't the employees rebel against this sudden loss of autonomy? How did this top-down mandate work so smoothly within a framework that champions bottom-up thinking?
Well, because the OKR system is highly adaptable to the psychological reality of the business environment. Ben Horowitz often talks about peacetime versus wartime CEOs.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah. In peacetime, when the company is stable and growing, you want massive bottom-up innovation. You want 1,000 flowers blooming. You want engineers experimenting with new ideas. But in wartime, when there is an existential threat to the company's survival, that bottom-up chaos will kill you.
Because everyone's just doing their own thing.
Right. You need unified, top-down, hyper-focused alignment. The employees didn't rebel during Operation Crush because the existential threat of Motorola was communicated transparently. They understood that if they didn't unite under this top-down mandate, they would all be out of a job.
That makes total sense.
What the OKR system allowed Intel to do was broadcast that top-down wartime mandate with absolute, crystalline clarity to every single employee across the globe, instantly. The speed of the pivot was staggering. Bill Davidow noted that Motorola couldn't even get a flight ticket from Chicago to Arizona approved by their bureaucracy in the time it took Intel to realign its entire global workforce toward a singular goal.
Wow. That speed, that clarity, that's what transforms OKRs from a simple checklist into a corporate superpower. And in the book, John Doerr structures the entire methodology around 4 specific superpowers. Operation Crush works so well precisely because Intel focused all their energy on one single enemy. So let's break down superpower #1, focus and commit to priorities.
This is where the intense discipline of the system comes into play. Because measuring what matters fundamentally begins with asking a very painful question. What is most important for the next 3 to 12 months? And conversely, what are we going to deliberately ignore?
The ignoring part is the hardest.
Always. You have to define the structure of the goal perfectly. The objective is the what. It needs to be inspirational, concrete, action-oriented, and easily understood by anyone in the company. The key results are the HOW. They must be strictly measurable and time-bound.
Marissa Mayer, who was a key executive early on at Google and heavily championed this system, she famously said, "It's not a key result unless it has a number."
I love that quote.
It's so good. If you cannot measure it objectively, it's not a key result, it's just a wish.
Precisely. And the most difficult rule of superpower #1, the rule that companies struggle with the most, is that less is more. You are strictly limited to 3 to 5 OKRs per cycle. Because saying yes to one strategic initiative fundamentally means saying no to 1,000 other potentially good ideas.
I often think of this like packing a backpack for a month-long hike in the wilderness.
Okay, I like where this is going.
When you first start packing, your anxiety and your fear of the unknown take over, right? You try to pack everything you might possibly need. An extra pair of heavy boots, a massive cast iron frying pan, a giant tent, like 5 books. You want to be prepared for every single scenario.
Just in case.
Exactly. But if you do that, you're going to collapse under the sheer weight of your own backpack 3 miles up the trail. If you bring the heavy skillet, you are actively sacrificing your speed and your endurance. You can only pack what is absolutely, unquestionably essential for your survival and forward progress. Every single item has to earn its place in the bag. That's what an OKR is. It has to earn its place on the dashboard.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And if you don't pack carefully, or if you focus on the wrong metrics because you are rushing, you end up with a phenomenon that the Harvard Business School famously calls goals gone wild.
Oh, this brings us to the Ford Pinto story. For anyone listening who is unfamiliar, this is a terrifying historical cautionary tale of what happens when you do not pair your key results properly. Let's explore the mechanics of this disaster because it's pretty dark.
It is a dark but vital lesson. Back in 1971, Ford was hemorrhaging market share to cheap, highly fuel-efficient foreign cars. The CEO at the time, Lee Iacocca, was furious and demanded a new subcompact car be built at breakneck speed.
Right.
He set 2 massive overarching quantitative goals for the engineering team. The car had to weigh strictly under 2,000 pounds, and it had to cost strictly under $2,000 to produce.
And to hit those absolute hard numbers, the management team completely compromised on safety. Like, they designed the car so the gas tank was placed just 6 inches in front of a very flimsy rear bumper.
Yes.
During the development phase, crash tests clearly showed that rear-end collisions would easily puncture the tank and cause a fire. The engineers actually found that a simple $1 piece of plastic shielding could stop the tank from puncturing, but the executives threw the solution out because it added $1 to the cost and 1 pound to the weight. It technically violated the key results set by the CEO.
Wait, so they just ignored the safety data to hit a metric?
Yes. And the consequences were devastating. Hundreds of people died in horrific fires when Pintos were rear-ended on the highway. Ford faced the largest recall in automotive history. They paid out massive settlements, and their brand reputation was shattered for a generation.
Wow.
They had incredibly clear, quantifiable goals, and the team hit them perfectly. But they completely lacked what Andy Grove calls pairing key results.
Right, the mechanism here is vital. If you have a key result focused purely on quantity, cost, or speed, you must mathematically pair it with a counterbalancing key result focused on quality or safety. You have to measure the effect and the counter effect simultaneously to ensure you aren't optimizing one metric by secretly destroying the company somewhere else.
It's the ultimate check and balance. And we see the positive application of this intense focus in the more modern case studies detailed in the book. Take Brett Koff, the founder of Remind, which is a wildly successful app connecting teachers, students, and parents.
Right, Brett's story is fascinating.
Because he struggled heavily with ADHD and dyslexia growing up. For him, focus wasn't just a corporate buzzword they threw around in a board meeting. It was a daily, visceral neurological battle. His company was scaling insanely fast. They were adding up to 80,000 users a day at one point. But internally, they were drowning in chaos.
Because they were falling into the trap of trying to do too much, which is a classic symptom of startup success.
Right.
When Brett brought in John Doerr and adopted OKRs, it forced his leadership team to stop trying to build a dozen new features at once. They had to ruthlessly pare down their focus to what mattered most, which was teacher retention.
Just that one thing.
Yes. They had to look at incredibly lucrative feature requests from investors and say no, just to ensure their core platform didn't collapse under the weight of its own code. The OKRs gave Brett the structural scaffolding his brain needed to shut out the noise.
And then there's the case of Nuna, a health data company built by Jeannie Kim. She took on the monumental, incredibly complex task of building a massive, unified Medicaid database for the government. She learned a very hard, very public lesson about the nature of commitment. She eagerly rolled out OKRs to her entire team, expecting them to embrace the discipline.
But she didn't publicly commit to her own individual OKRs as the CEO?
Exactly. And as a result, her team basically ignored the entire system. But I want to push on this point for a second.
Sure.
If I'm a CEO, my board of directors expects me to oversee everything. I am supposed to be omniscient. How do I justify publicly narrowing my focus to just 3 things? Why is it so incredibly hard for leaders to commit to this?
It comes down to a deeply ingrained psychological vulnerability in leadership. Leaders suffer from massive FOMO fear of missing out. They are terrified that if they publicly state they are ignoring certain areas to focus on a few key priorities, a competitor will outflank them or their board will think they're slacking.
Oh, that makes sense.
But Jeannie Kim realized that this lack of focused commitment at the top trickles down and completely paralyzes the organization. If the CEO won't prioritize, the middle managers won't prioritize, and the frontline workers are left trying to do 100 things poorly.
Right.
Jeannie Kim learned that for a team to buy into the rigorous discipline of OKRs, the CEO cannot be exempt from the rules. The leader must model the commitment publicly. When Jeannie finally published her own OKRs on the company dashboard and allowed her engineering team to grade her on them, the entire culture of the company shifted overnight. They saw that accountability and focus applied to everyone, especially the boss.
Okay, so you've packed the backpack correctly, you know exactly what you're focusing on, and you've paired your metrics so you don't build a Ford Pinto. But if you have an organization of thousands of people spread across multiple time zones, how do you get them all rowing in the exact same direction without micromanaging them?
Right.
That brings us to superpower, #2. Align and connect for teamwork.
Alignment is the operational secret sauce that prevents highly talented teams from unknowingly working at cross purposes. And the foundational mechanism that drives alignment is transparency. In a fully realized OKR system, everyone's goals, from the CEO all the way down to the newest intern, are public for anyone in the company to see.
And the data supports this massively. According to the book, internal surveys consistently show that 92% of workers are more motivated if their goals are public. Meritocracy truly flourishes in sunlight. There's no hiding behind vague, padded job descriptions when your actual quarterly deliverables are posted on the intranet for everyone to see.
John Doerr uses a very clear, relatable analogy to explain how this vertical alignment cascades through an organization. Imagine a fictional professional football team, the Sandhill Unicorns.
Okay, the unicorns. I like it.
Right. So the general manager, sitting at the very top of the organization, has a single overarching objective: make money for the billionaire owner.
Simple enough. But how does that mandate translate to the people actually doing the work on the field?
The GM decides his key results to achieve that objective are: 1, win the Super Bowl, and 2, fill the home stadium stands to 90% capacity. Now watch how those key results cascade down to the next level of management. The head coach takes the GM's first key result, win the Super Bowl, and adopts it as his own personal objective.
I see.
Meanwhile, the PR director takes the GM's second key result, fill the stands to 90%, and adopts that as her objective.
Right. So now the head coach's objective is win the Super Bowl, and he has to figure out how to do that. His key results become highly specific metrics like average 300 passing yards per game and hold the opposing defense to under 17 points.
Yeah.
Then the process repeats. The offensive coordinator takes 300 passing yards as his objective, and his key results become draft a franchise quarterback and improve the offensive line's pass block win rate. It cascades perfectly down the hierarchy. Every single person in the organization, from the quarterback to the ticket salesperson, knows exactly how their specific daily task connects all the way back up to making money for the owner.
That vertical cascading is incredibly powerful for establishing a chain of command. But what's even more crucial and far more difficult to achieve in today's complex tech economy is horizontal alignment. Let's look at the real-world case study of MyFitnessPal.
Okay.
When they were acquired by the athletic apparel giant Under Armour, they were tasked with integrating massive, disparate software systems and launching a new premium version of the app. But different engineering and product teams were working in total isolation. They literally had 2 different app teams independently building map tracking functions using entirely different software providers.
What? That is crazy.
It was complete redundant chaos that was burning through cash and time.
Because they weren't looking sideways. They were only looking up at their bosses to see what they were supposed to do. If I take the Sandhill Unicorns analogy, it's like if the PR director launches a massive marketing campaign to sell out the stadium, but the offensive coordinator decides to rest the star quarterback that same week to keep him healthy for the playoffs.
Yes, perfect example.
Ticket sales plummet, the PR director fails her goal, all because the 2 departments didn't align their OKRs horizontally.
That is exactly what happens in corporate silos. Horizontal alignment cures what is consistently the #1 cause of project slippage and failure in software development, which is unacknowledged dependencies. If the back-end engineering team is building a new product feature, but they haven't aligned horizontally with the marketing team on the launch date or the legal team on compliance, the product will fail upon release.
Atticus Tyson, the chief information officer at Intuit, experienced this friction firsthand. Intuit, which is a massive financial software company, was trying to execute a monumental shift of all their legacy systems to the cloud. Tyson realized he had to use OKR transparency to actively break down these ancient territorial IT silos.
Is massive undertaking.
He literally had to stand up in front of his engineers and tell them, stop connecting your goals to my goals, connect them to the teams sitting next to you.
And we should examine how he actually enforced that. Tyson didn't just send an email. He utilized the OKR software platform to force cross-functional visibility.
Yeah.
He instituted weekly stand-ups where engineering leads had to explicitly state which other departments' OKRs they were relying on for the week.
Wow, so they couldn't hide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He forced them to align horizontally to ensure they were actually supporting each other's software builds, rather than just optimizing their own little corner of the code.
Let's ground this for the listener. If you are sitting in your home office right now, or, you're commuting, think about your own workplace. Think about your Slack channels and your inbox. How much of your daily communication is just you frantically trying to figure out what the team next door is doing so you don't duplicate their work or get blindsided by a deadline?
A lot of it, usually.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, horizontal alignment is about demolishing the traditional, rigid corporate ladder and creating a dynamic team of teams. When OKRs are completely public, a marketing person can log in, see what an engineer is working on, and instantly spot a synergy or a dependency that executive management never would have noticed from the top floor. It creates a frictionless environment for cross-functional collaboration.
So, you have your focus locked in. Your team is totally aligned, both vertically up the chain and horizontally across departments. But how do you make sure you actually arrive at the destination? You need relentless, unflinching tracking. Which brings us to superpower #3, track for accountability.
Because goals without tracking are just New Year's resolutions. And we all know exactly how those end up by the second week of February. Abandoned and forgotten.
So true. Doerr tells this horrifying, almost comical story in the book about a major Fortune 500 company. They wanted to improve their goal-setting culture, so they mandated that their 82,000 employees write down their goal.
Okay, good start.
But they did it using individual Microsoft Word documents.
Oh my God, 82,000 Word documents.
Yes, it is a logistical nightmare. Just imagine the sheer volume of digital paper. If they wanted to update those goals quarterly, that's over 320,000 Word documents a year, floating around in email attachments, completely unsearchable, totally disconnected from one another, and impossible to aggregate. It is the absolute definition of a set-and-forget culture.
Which is why cloud-based, real-time tracking dashboards are absolutely necessary for the system to function. You have to be able to see the data living and breathing on your screen. OKRs have a very specific life cycle. When you check in on an OKR during a weekly or monthly meeting, you basically have 4 options based on the data.
Right.
You can continue if your metrics show you are in the green and on track. You can update if you are in the yellow, meaning you need to shift resources or tweak the strategy to get back on track. You can start a new goal if a mid-cycle market shift requires an immediate pivot. Or, and this is the hardest one, you can stop if the goal is completely in the red and no longer serves the company's overarching priorities.
And Google has a very specific quantitative scoring system for this tracking process. At the end of every quarter, employees grade their OKRs on a scale of 0.0 to 1.0. A score of 0.0 to 0.3 is considered red. You failed to make meaningful progress. 0.4 to 0.6 is yellow, you made progress but fell short of the target. And 0.7 to 1.0 is green, you successfully delivered.
But here's where I have to ask a very serious practical question. If I'm working at a normal high-pressure company and I step into a meeting and score a 0.3 on my primary objective for the quarter, I am deep in the red. I am terrified. I am quietly updating my resume under the desk because I think I'm getting fired on Friday. How does a company track accountability so ruthlessly, putting everyone's failures on a public dashboard, without turning that data into a weapon that management uses against its own people?
It's a brilliant question, and it is the absolute crux of why tracking works when done correctly, and why it fails spectacularly when misapplied. The psychological benefit of tracking in a mature OKR system is that it relies on objective numerical scoring combined with subjective self-assessment.
What does that mean in practice?
The number on the dashboard is just a starting point for a conversation, not a guillotine. If you score a 0.3, the manager's question isn't, why are you so terrible at your job? The question is, let's look at the data together. Was the original goal too ambitious? Did another department fail to deliver a crucial dependency? Did a competitor change the market landscape?
Oh, I see.
It actively creates a safe space for accountability without judgment. The data objectively highlights the problem so the team can huddle up and fix it together, rather than pointing fingers.
We see this mechanism beautifully illustrated in the book with the case study of the Gates Foundation. Patty Stonesifer was tasked with running this massive $20 billion startup with a literal mandate to save the world fighting malaria, eradicating polio, and curbing HIV. You are dealing with human lives. The stakes could not possibly be higher.
Absolutely.
They used OKRs to track their massive grants and global health initiatives. When a goal was falling behind, say, a supply chain initiative for distributing bed nets in sub-Saharan Africa turned yellow on the dashboard, it wasn't about punishing the researcher in charge.
Exactly. The dashboard allowed Stonesifer to react in real time.
Right.
If a polio initiative went yellow, she didn't wait for a year-end review. She could immediately pull logistics experts or funding from a green project and deploy them to the yellow project to save it. Tracking allowed them to avoid the sunk cost fallacy and deploy limited resources with surgical precision mid-quarter.
Which perfectly sets up the final and most exhilarating of the four core mechanisms. Superpower #4, stretch 4, amazing. Because John Doerr argues that if you are tracking your goals perfectly and you are hitting 1.0 a 100% success rate every single quarter, well, you are actually failing the system.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive to everything we are taught in school. If I get 100% on the test, how am I failing?
Because it means you aren't aiming high enough. You are sandbagging. You are playing it safe to protect your ego. In the OKR framework, you have to distinguish between two distinct types of goals. First, you have committed goals. These are things like daily sales quotas. Goals you absolutely must hit 100%.
Right, those are non-negotiable.
But then you have aspirational or stretch goals. These are the moonshots. For a stretch goal, hitting just 60 to 70%, landing that 0.6 or 0.7 on the Google scale is considered a massive, wild success.
This concept is deeply embedded in Google's corporate culture. They refer to it as the gospel of 10x. Larry Page famously wants his teams to be uncomfortably excited. He wants them to operate with a healthy disregard for the impossible. There is this phenomenal paradigm-shifting quote in the book from AstroTeller, who runs Google's secretive X division, their moonshot factory.
I love this quote.
He explained the 10X philosophy by saying, if you want your car to get 50 miles per gallon, fine. You can tweak the engine, you can retool the chassis a little bit. But if I tell you the car has to run on a single gallon of gas for 500 miles, you can't just tweak the existing model. You have to start over. You have to invent an entirely new propulsion system.
That is the pure essence of a stretch goal. A 10% improvement is just operational efficiency. You work a little harder, you optimize a process, but a 10x improvement requires you to completely burn down your foundational assumptions and reinvent the entire architecture of the problem. It forces radical innovation because the old methods are mathematically incapable of reaching the new goal.
The story of Google Chrome is perhaps the most perfect example of this in modern tech history. Sundar Pichai, years before he became the CEO of Google, was running product development. His team built the Chrome browser from scratch to compete with Internet Explorer. In 2008, he set an incredibly audacious OKR, reached 20 million weekly active users by the end of the year.
Which is a terrifying goal because they were starting at literally 0 users. They had to convince 20 million people to change their fundamental internet habits.
Right. And year one, they missed it. They hit less than 10 million users. Yeah. Now, in a traditional corporate environment, Pichai might have been fired or at least demoted for missing his key metric by 50%. But did he get fired? No. Year two, despite missing the previous goal, he set the new stretch goal at 50 million users.
Oh, wow.
They hit 37 million. Still missed it. But in year three, he stretched the goal again to an unbelievable 111 million users.
And how did they finally cross that chasm? Because it couldn't just keep doing what they were doing. They had to engage in 10x thinking. They had to radically redesign their underlying software architecture to make the browser faster. They aggressively pushed into new international markets. They even did something completely un-Google-like at the time. They launched massive television advertising campaigns.
Which was huge for them.
And through that relentless forced innovation, they hit 111 million users. Today, Chrome dominates the globe. But they never, ever would have achieved that dominance if Pichai hadn't set goals that practically guaranteed his team would initially fail.
The exact same methodology was applied at YouTube. Suzu Ochiki and Christos Goudreau set a stretch goal to hit 1 billion daily watch hours. It became their white whale. They were terrified of it. And it's crucial to understand why that specific metric was so hard. The industry standard at the time was measuring views or clicks. But views are easy to manipulate with clickbait thumbnails. Watch time is a measure of true human engagement. It means the content is actually valuable. It took them 4 grueling years, requiring them to completely tear down and redesign their recommendation algorithms from scratch, but they finally hit 1 billion hours.
So what does this all mean? It means failure is literally engineered into the OKR system as a feature, not a bug. If you aren't failing at least 30% of the time on your aspirational goals, you are standing still. And in the modern tech economy, standing still means you are dying.
But there is a very delicate psychological balance required here. As a leader, you have to set a stretch goal that pushes the team to rethink their approach fundamentally. But you cannot set a goal that is so absurdly mathematically impossible that it breaks their morale.
Right. If it's literally impossible, people just give up.
Exactly. If people feel like they're on a perpetual death march where success is completely unattainable, they will simply check out. That's why the human element of management is so incredibly vital to making this math work.
Which brings us to the crucial second half of the equation. You can have the best OKRs, the most brilliant metrics, the perfect stretch goals that perfectly balance ambition and reality. But at the end of the day, they are just numbers on a digital dashboard. They are cold data. They need a human voice to bring them to life and guide the team through the inevitable failures. Enter CFRs.
Continuous performance management. CFRs stand for conversations, feedback, and recognition. If OKRs are the hard, structural skeleton of the organization, CFRs are the muscle and the nervous system that actually make the body move. And this framework is officially the death knell for the traditional annual performance review.
And good riddance to it. The data on annual reviews is staggering. According to the book, only 6% of HR leaders think the annual review process is actually worth the 7.5 hours it takes per employee to complete.
Only 6%.
It is universally despised by both managers and employees. Why? Because it is backward-looking. It is heavily biased by whatever you happen to do in the last 3 weeks. The recency bias is huge, and it is completely detached from the actual flow of daily work. I like to think of it this way. Annual reviews are like performing an autopsy.
Oh, that's grim.
But it's true. You find out exactly what went wrong, you see where the disease spread, but the patient is already dead on the table. It's way too late to fix anything. CFRs, on the other hand, are like preventative medicine. You are constantly monitoring the patient's vitals, adjusting the diet, and healing the minor injuries in real time before they become fatal.
That's a perfect analogy. Let's break down the acronym to see how this preventative medicine works.
Yeah.
Conversations refer to authentic, richly textured, usually one-on-one exchanges between a manager and a contributor. These aren't just status updates, they are coaching sessions. Feedback must be bidirectional, meaning the critique flows up from the employee to the manager just as freely as it flows down, and it must be networked horizontally across peers. And recognition is about crowdsourced meritocracy, intentionally celebrating wins, both large and small, across the organization to build momentum.
But the absolute non-negotiable rule of CFRs and Doerr emphasizes this heavily throughout the text, is that you must completely, legally, and culturally divorce your OKRs from your compensation conversations.
If you do not divorce them, the entire system collapses in on itself. As we discussed earlier, if my year-end bonus is mathematically based on hitting my OKR, I will never, ever set a stretch goal. I will sandbag every single metric to ensure I get paid.
Exactly.
Human judgment cannot be outsourced to an algorithm. Your bonus and your career trajectory should be based on your overall impact, how creatively you navigated unforeseen challenges, and your teamwork, not a rigid adherence to a number that might have become totally obsolete halfway through the quarter due to a market shift.
OKRs are the goalposts and the yard markers on the field. CFRs are the huddles between plays, the sideline coaching, and the end zone celebrations. Look at the transformative case study of Adobe. Donna Morris, an HR leader there, realized their annual review system, which used a forced curve to rank employees, was actively contradicting their core collaborative values.
Oh, forced curves are the worst.
They really are. It was pitting employees against each other in a zero-sum game for a limited pool of bonus money. It bred resentment, so she completely blew the system up and instituted what she called check-ins.
And the mechanics of these check-ins are brilliant in their simplicity. They are lightweight, regular conversations focused specifically on 3 things: expectations, feedback, and career growth. By ditching the rigid stack rankings and instituting these continuous future-focused conversations, Adobe saw a massive drop in voluntary turnover. Employees finally felt like their managers were acting as invested coaches trying to help them win, rather than judges waiting to penalize them at the end of the year.
And at Zoom Pizza, a fascinating robotics startup making pizza, The founders, Alex Garden and Julia Collins, implemented a very strict rule for their bi-weekly one-on-ones to ensure the CFR process worked. These meetings were sacred. You could not cancel them, period. And the defining rule was, you cannot talk about daily work tasks in this meeting.
Which sounds completely crazy for a fast-paced, cash-burning startup. The instinct is to use every single meeting to put out fires. But the underlying logic is flawless. Garden and Collins understood that the meeting isn't a status update. That's what the public OKR dashboard is for.
Exactly.
If I want to know if the robot is fixed, I'll look at the data. The one-on-one meeting is strictly reserved to ask the human questions. What makes you happy here? What is draining your energy this week? Where do you want your career to be in 2 years? And how can I help you get there? It builds profound trust and alignment between the manager and the employee, which pays massive dividends when the work gets stressful.
But here's the stark reality. None of this, not the perfectly crafted OKRs, not the empathetic CFRs, can survive if they are planted in a toxic environment. Which brings us to our final underlying theme: culture as the ultimate medium.
Everything we have discussed is entirely dependent on a culture of psychological safety. If your employees are secretly afraid to fail, they will never stretch. If they're afraid to speak up or challenge the boss, they will never offer honest, bidirectional feedback. The system requires trust as its foundational fuel.
The book outlines a fascinating story about a healthcare company called Lumeris that illustrates this perfectly. They tried to implement OKRs, they had the software, they had the training, but the employees completely resisted. They fought the system. Why? Because they were terrified of the transparency.
It exposed them.
Yes. They had been wired since kindergarten to view failure, getting a red mark on a test, as unequivocally bad. Lumeris had developed a hero culture where everyone wanted to be the lone savior who swooped in to fix problems, which meant they spent most of their time hiding their mistakes from everyone else until the last minute.
To fix the OKR rollout, Lumeris realized they had to systematically rewire their people's psychology to overcome those kindergarten-level fears of failure. And that change had to start at the top. The leadership had to step up and model extreme vulnerability.
What did they do?
The COO literally stood up in front of the company and essentially said, "We are going to be brutally transparent with our metrics, but we are going to do it without judgment." They had to actively shift the incentives from a hero culture to a team culture. And when people finally realized that admitting a mistake or marking an OKR in the red wouldn't get them fired, but would instead instantly get them support and resources from other departments, adoption of the system skyrocketed.
And it isn't just corporate America that benefits from this cultural transparency. Bono, yes, the legendary lead singer of U2, used OKRs for his One campaign, a massive global nonprofit dedicated to fighting extreme poverty and preventable disease in Africa.
This is perhaps one of the most powerful and moving examples in the entire book. Bono realized through hard experience that moral outrage is not enough. Passion, no matter how deep, is not enough. You can have all the heart in the world, you can write the best protest songs, but if your efforts aren't matched with cold, hard intellectual rigor, you won't actually save any lives.
Bono beautifully articulated this. He said that if the heart doesn't find a perfect rhyme with the head, passion means nothing. They use the OKR system to transform their operations. Specifically, they utilized the red, yellow, green traffic light color coding system to run their board meetings. In a passionate NGO environment where everyone wants to do everything to help everyone, OKRs brought absolute clarity and structure.
It forced them to focus.
It did. If a massive fundraising initiative or a political lobbying effort was marked red, they didn't hide it to protect their egos. They flashed it on the screen so the board could tackle it. It allowed them to take a massive risk safely, to know empirically what was actually moving the needle on poverty, and to ruthlessly drop initiatives that weren't working.
This raises an important question, though, for anyone listening who manages a team. How do leaders actively model that vulnerability so their teams feel safe enough to shoot for the moon and risk flashing a red metric on the screen?
It's tough.
It requires a practice we call active transparency. It requires a leader, the CEO, the director, the manager, to stand up and say, "Here are my personal goals for the quarter. I failed at this specific one miserably. I scored a 0.2. Here is exactly why I failed, and here's what I learned from it."
That takes guts.
It does. But when the leader does that, it gives tacit permission to the entire organization to take massive swings without the paralyzing fear of failure. Active transparency makes humans vulnerable, but ironically, that shared vulnerability builds the ultimate unbreakable strength in a corporate culture.
It really is a blueprint for operational excellence, but more than that, it's a blueprint for human alignment. So let's bring this all back to you, listening to this deep dive right now. How do you apply this tomorrow morning when you log back into your computer?
It's actionable right away.
It is. First, define your focus. Choose just 3 to 5 things that matter most for the next quarter and politely ignore the rest. Second, make them mathematically measurable. Remember Marissa Mayer's rule? It's not a key result without a number. Third, align those goals with your team horizontally and make them public so everyone knows what you're doing. Fourth, track them ruthlessly, color code them, update them regularly so you can course correct in real time. And finally, never forget the human element. Institute regular, meaningful CFR conversations. Decouple those continuous feedback sessions from your self-worth and your annual compensation.
And be patient with yourself and your team. Implementing this is about building organizational goal muscle. It takes time and repetition. You will likely fail the first few times you try to write effective OKRs. They will be too vague or too easy. But the absolute clarity and alignment you gain on the other side of that learning curve is truly transformative for any team.
And that leaves me with a final provocative thought that I haven't been able to shake since reading this book. We've spent this time talking about titans of industry Intel, Google, Adobe. But what if we took this framework and applied the rigorous logic of OKRs and the profound empathy of CFRs to our personal lives?
Oh, wow.
Right. What if you had personal OKRs for your health or your family time? Or even better, what if we applied this to local public governance? Imagine your local city council operating with transparent, publicly visible OKRs.
That would be amazing.
Imagine them setting a 10x stretch mentality to solve the local housing crisis or fix public transit, complete with real-time red, yellow, and green tracking dashboards that every single citizen can view online. The framework isn't just a corporate buzzword for tech startups. It really is a blueprint for broader human progress.
It's a fascinating vision
Right.
because ultimately, when you rigorously measure what actually matters, you fundamentally change what is possible.
So beautifully said. If you want to dive deeper into this framework and start implementing these 4 superpowers in your own career, you absolutely must read the source material. Go buy the book, Measure What Matters by John Doerr. It obviously supports the author, but much more importantly, it is an invaluable investment in your own ability to execute on your biggest, most ambitious ideas.
Highly recommend picking it up.
And if you enjoyed this breakdown and found it valuable, please subscribe and leave a comment on Decode Deep Dive. Let us know what complex topics or books you want us to unpack next. Remember, everyone wants to change the world, everyone has a great idea in the shower, but ideas are easy. Execution is everything. So the only question left is, what are you going to measure tomorrow?